A statement from the Standing Committee on Roads, Transportation and Housing regarding the status of construction of the Ensiu River Bridge in Mwingi Central. In the statement, the committee should, 1, provide an explanation for the continued delays in the construction of Ensiu River Bridge, despite previous government pledges to prioritize this project following the tragic events of 2021, where a school bus was swept away while crossing the swollen Ensiu River. 2, state specific measures being implemented to ensure that the completion of Ensiu River Bridge is expedited, stating a revised and realistic completion date. 3, cause a visit to the Ensiu River Bridge site to assess ongoing works, if any, and report on any observed shortcomings. And number 4, the last, state the amount of funding allocated to this project from financial year 2021-2022 to date, disclosing improvements, if any, meant in the emergency response capacities of Kitui County following recent tragedies at Ensiu River. Senator Beth Siango, MP, nominated by ODM. Thank you.
Statements pursuant to Standing Order 56, 1B, the Chairperson, Standing Committee on Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I guess the technology at times becomes a challenge. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 56 1B to table a report for the Energy Committee for the period commencing on 1st January to 16th April 2024. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 56 1B to make a statement on the activities of the Standing Committee on Energy from January 16th to April 2024. Mr. Speaker, during the period under review, the committee held a total of 15 sittings and considered 8 statements. The committee also considered 2 bills and 1 petition. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Energy Amendment Bill of 2023, Senate Bill 42 of 2023, the status of the bill is before the committee, was published on 1st September 2023 and introduced in the Senate by way of first reading on Tuesday, 17th October 2023, and thereafter stood committed to the Senate Steering Committee on Energy for the consideration and facilitation of public participation. The committee proceeded to undertake a public participation on the bill. In this regard, the committee published an advertisement in the Daily Nation and Standard newspaper on Tuesday, 19th October 2023, inviting members of the public to submit written memoranda to the committee on the bill by 3rd November 2023. The committee considered the memoranda received and adopted the report on 28th November 2023. The bill is currently waiting the second reading. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Local Content Bill of 2023, that is Senate Bill number 50, status is before the committee, was published on 24th November 2023 and was introduced to the Senate by the way of first reading on 28th March 2024 and thereafter stood committed to the Senate Standing Committee on Energy for consideration and facilitation of the public participation. The committee proceeded to undertake public participation on the bill. In this regard, the committee published an advertisement in the Daily Nation and the Standard newspaper on Wednesday, 3rd April 2024, inviting members of the public to submit written memoranda to the committee on the bill by 16th April 2024. Once the memoranda is received, the committee will consider them. Statements. Mr. Speaker, sir, regarding statement pursuant to Standing Order 53 of the Senate Standing Orders, 8 statements were sought from the committee. The committee considered and concluded 1 statement. In considering the said statements, the reports and the responses received by the committee were shared with respective senators. The following statements were concluded. Statements sought by Senator Miraj Abdurrahman MP for the upsurge of the electricity fire incidents in Mombasa County. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Annex 1 lists the status of each of the 14 statements that are pending before the committee. Petitions. Mr. Speaker, sir, on Wednesday, the 16th November 2023, a petition by the residents of Uyombo Village in Kilifi County concerning the protection of the light of life, health, and a clean environment and the other constitutionally protected rights and fundamental freedoms were presented to the Senate pursuant to Standing Order 236 and referred to the Senate Standing Committee on Energy pursuant to Standing Order 238-1. Their prayers included ordering all responsible state agencies to remove Uyombo from the list of possible sites for nuclear reactor. The committee has scheduled meetings with all the relevant stakeholders and petitioners. Mr. Speaker, sir, on Friday, 1st March 2024, the committee went to Uyombo Village in Kilifi County to meet the stakeholders to the petition. During the presentation, NUPEA notified the committee that on the 13th July 2023, a court case number listed Mkogoro and Zawadi versus Nuclear Power Energy Agency and 4 others was filed at the Environmental and Land Court in Marindi. The committee observed that pursuant to Standing Order 103 of the Senate, a matter is considered to be sub judice when it refers to an active criminal or civil proceedings, and the discussion of such a matter is likely to prejudice its fair determination. In line with the Standing Orders 103, the Senate Standing Committee orders, the committee resolved to adjourn the meeting, having declared the matter as sub judice. A report on the petition will be tabled on the 18th March 2024. Inquiry. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee conducted an inquiry on the high cost of electricity in the country, adopted and tabled its report to the Senate on the 20th September 2023. The report of the committee was adopted by the Senate on Wednesday, 28th February 2024. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee made several recommendations, including that within 14 days after the adoption of the report by the Senate, the Minister of Energy should disclose the full identities of the beneficial owners of the IPPs, including the companies listed as shareholders in foreign jurisdiction. That thermal power plants should convert to HFO and LNG in accordance with their respective PPAs within 18 to 36 months. That the Ministry of Energy should facilitate KETRACO to prioritize completion of the following lines. 1. The 132 kV Narok-Bomet line within 12 months, which will allow the switching off of the Muholoni gas turbine plant, whose cost of production is the highest in the country. Completion of the energy and petroleum and the protection of critical energy infrastructures in the country. Conduct a campaign in the country on ways Kenyans can individually save on the cost of energies. Meet with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum regarding the procurement of energy equipment like transformers and meters, which are critical components in electricity connectivity. Continue to engage the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum regarding the government-to-government agreement on the petroleum products importation. Meet with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum regarding the status of Power and Lighting Company with reference to its financial status and the losses that it's making. KPLC has projected a loss of up to 5.5 billion Kenya shillings in these financial years. Mr. Speaker, sir, I table.
The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Finance and Budget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, on behalf of the Chairman of the Committee on Finance and Budget, I rise pursuant to Standing Order number 56-1B of the Senate Standing Orders to make a statement on the activities of this committee on the period running from 29th of January to 30th of March this year. Mr. Speaker, sir, during the period under review, we held a total of 22 meetings. In one particular aspect, we dealt, Mr. Speaker, with bills that we considered as a committee. And Mr. Speaker, during the period under review, the committee considered the following bills. 1, the Public Finance Management Bill. 2, the County Public Finance Laws Bill. 3, the Division of Revenue Bill 2024. 4, and those were the bulks. And Mr. Speaker, we also dealt with the reports that were tabled before the committee during this period. And Mr. Speaker, the reports were on the following areas. 1, the 2024 budget policy statement. A report was debated and adopted by this House. The 2024 medium-term debt management. This report was debated and adopted by this House. A petition on regulation of credit profession. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the status of implementation of projects funded by the conditional grants on supplement of construction of the county headquarters in the counties of Isiolo, Tana River, Lamu, Tharaka Nithi, and Nyandarua. Mr. Speaker, this report is awaiting consideration and adoption by the House. The third category, Mr. Speaker, was on statements before the committee. During the period under review, the committee deliberated and concluded on the following 5 statements. 1, the status of pending bills in Kakamega County that had been brought before the House by the Senator of Kakamega, Dr. Boni Khadwale, CBS, MPH, CHB, and others. No, I wanted to differentiate the doctorate of Professor Mundiki and mine.
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, on the rental fees incurred by the county government of Kakamega, payments made to all garbage collectors and sewerage service providers by all counties for the financial year 2021-22 and 2022-23 and 2023-24, this as requested by Senator William Kisang, MP. Kenyatta International Airport, this was raised by the distinguished senator nominated Shakila Abdallah. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have annexed in Annexure 1 the status of each of the 28 statements that are pending before the committee. The fourth category, Mr. Speaker, was on petitions considered by our committee. And Mr. Speaker, the committee considered and adopted a report on the petition in regulation of credit profession. The petition had been submitted to the Senate by CIS Certified Public Accountant Mokaya Magembe Bernard and the Council of Institute of Credit Management of Kenya. A bill on the regulation of the credit profession sponsored by the committee will, Mr. Speaker, be introduced in the House in the next few days to address the concerns within this petition. The fifth category was legislative proposals considered by my committee. And Mr. Speaker, we carried out pre-publication scrutiny and examined the crypto assets legislative proposal by Senator Alan Chesang, the Senator of Kitale. The CBK provided views to the committee regarding the proposed legislation. The committee submitted its comments to the Speaker for the necessary action. The sixth consideration was the status of the implementation of the projects funded by the conditional grant on the supplement of construction of county headquarters. Following the request by the Council of Governors, the projects funded by the conditional grant on construction of county headquarters, they requested that they be transferred from the State Department of Public Works to the respective county governments. The committee held a multi-agency meeting with the National Treasury, State Department of Public Works, the Council of Governors, and respective county senators and Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the meeting was to deliberate on a joint position and determine the best way forward on how to fast-track these stalled projects to ensure the intended purpose for which be accomplished. Mr. Speaker, the committee tabled the report to the Senate with the recommendations, among others, that the overall responsibility of project management, including supervision, monitoring, and payment of contractors of the project, should be handed over to the respective beneficiary county governments. This report, Mr. Speaker, is awaiting consideration of this House, debate, and adoption. The seventh activity is on the activities for the committee in the next quarter. Mr. Speaker, the committee is scheduled to consider the following business. 1, report of the Public Finance Management Bill, and 2, matrix of stakeholder submissions on the county public finance laws. 3, the Division of Revenue Bill 2024, the County Allocation of Revenue Bill 2024, the County Government's Additional Allocations Bill 2024, the Medium-Term Review Strategy, the Control of Budget, County Government's Budget Implementation Reports, and finally, the statements pending before the committee. Mr. Speaker, the committee appreciates all the stakeholders who are available or who we consulted for valuable information that was availed to us. I also thank the members of the committee for dedication and commitment to ensure execution of the committee mandate. I also acknowledge the support accorded to the committee by the Office of the Speaker and the Office of the Clerk in facilitating the committee to effectively implement its work. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Health. We do not have even a member from that committee to read the report and table. Okay, that is dropped. Senator Kavindu, there are 2 statements that we had not called, one for Senator Kavindu and the other by...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand on the outstanding bills owed to faith-based health facilities by the National Health Insurance Fund. Mr. Speaker, sir, I arise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee of Health regarding the outstanding bills owed to faith-based health facilities by the national government, by the National Health Insurance Fund. In the statement, the committee should, 1, provide the number of faith-based health facilities per county and total amount of money owed by the National Health Insurance Fund over the past 5 years, from 2019 to 2024, to the said health facilities. 2, explain the reasons for delayed payments to the health-based health facilities, despite the facilities having rendered service. And 3, provide a timeline for the payment of the outstanding debt to the affected faith-based facilities, providing the measures in place to ensure payment is completed before the transition of the NHIF to the new Social Health Insurance Fund. Senator Agnes Kavindu Mudhama, Machakos County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kathuri Murungi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity to present this statement. My statement is on the drastic reduction in miraa prices. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism regarding the drastic reduction of miraa prices and other issues affecting the miraa sector. In the statement, the committee should, 1, investigate and report to the Senate the reasons for the drastic reduction in miraa prices from Kenya shillings 2,000 to Kenya shillings 300 per kilo, and the allegation of illegal charges of up to $4.5 US. That the market is fully open for miraa exports from Kenya and that there is free entry into the export business of miraa into Somalia. Number 3, Honorable Speaker, explain why Kenya Airways and other airlines are not around to carry miraa to Somalia and other markets, whereas miraa is a legal scheduled to revitalize the industry. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, sir, state markets to mitigate loss of revenues for miraa farmers and revenue for the government. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Next order, Clerk.
Order
What is
number
the
8.
issue, Senator Fernandez?
Mr. Speaker, I know we are pressed for time, but understanding order number 1, maybe you could have allowed us a few minutes just to seek clarification on 1 or 2 statements. Maybe you can pick either a few members, both sides.
Yeah, Senator Fernandez, I would easily accede to that request. But you must note we have lost 1 hour. From 5:30, we'll adjourn to discuss that motion. And therefore, we need to squeeze whatever is in the order paper up to 5:30. So I'm sorry, I may not be able to allocate some minutes for purposes of intervention. Next order.
Order number 9, the Election Offences Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 9 of 2020.
Next order.
Order number 10, the Statutory Instruments Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 10 of 2024, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to amend the Statutory Instruments Act to provide for the timelines within which statutory instruments shall be made and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 11, the Elections Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 11 of 2024, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to amend the Elections Act and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 12, the Political Parties Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 13 of 2024, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to amend the Political Parties Act 2011 and for connected purposes.
Now, honorable senators, at base juncture, allow me to invoke Standing Order 45-2 to rearrange the sequence of today's order paper. We will, from order number 12, proceed to order 19. So, Clerk, please proceed to call that order.
Order number 19, the Gambling Control Bill, National Assembly Bills number 70 of 2023, second reading.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Gambling Control Bill, National Assembly
Bill number 70 of 2023 be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Gambling Control Bill, National Assembly Bill number 70 of 2023, was published in the Kenya Gazette, supplement number 212 of 2023. The bill was considered by our colleagues in the National Assembly, and on the 6th of December 2023, they passed it. And thereafter, the bill was referred here to the Senate for consideration. Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill seeks to provide for the regulation of betting, casinos, and other forms of gambling, authorization of prize competitions and public lotteries, for the establishment of a gambling regulatory authority of Kenya, for the imposition of tax on betting and other forms of gambling. Mr. Speaker, you're very much aware that gambling is here with us, and we must learn to live with it. Because unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this is an industry which, to the best of my knowledge, we are still struggling as a country. The good thing, though, is that it's not a challenge that is unique to us as Kenya alone. World over, control of casinos and gambling activities poses a challenge to almost all administrators and administrations, Mr. Speaker. You know, for example, Mr. Speaker, that many sporting teams have betting companies as their shirt sponsors. But in the English Premier League, for example, they have given themselves, and all teams have been given 3 seasons in total to exit having betting companies as their shirt sponsors. Therefore, it points out to the fact, Mr. Speaker, that this is a concern that is global, that you have to learn how to live with this industry and adjust yourselves towards this wind. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we haven't done so well as a country. You know that about 3, 4, 5 years ago, Kenya began the imposition of taxes on betting. At that time, the thinking was we could use taxes in 2018 as a deterrence to keep young people from either betting or being addicted to it altogether. What a terrible mistake, Mr. Speaker. Because soon after, while we made it possible and made it difficult, because nowadays in Kenya, when you bet, I don't understand betting that much, Mr. Speaker, because I don't gamble, for example. I'm just a good sportsman who knows that winning and losing depends on how you're prepared for the day. And sometimes it falls into your favor, sometimes it's away. And on a day like today, Mr. Speaker, I wish the good old Arsenal can beat Bayern Munich. But if you speak to other people, they'll tell you that they have already placed a bet and they know what needs to happen. So, Mr. Speaker, if you're betting in Kenya, you as a bettor, the minute you place the bet, like Senator Sifuna is now telling me he has already placed a bet, he has already been deducted part of that money. And if you were to win, there'll also be a deduction, because it tells you that our thinking as a country is that we can use tax as a deterrence so that many young people don't engage themselves. Unfortunately, what have our young people done and the people that are engaged in betting? They have actually moved on from betting using platforms that are available here and able to be controlled here in Kenya. They are now betting online with companies whose jurisdiction remains unknown even globally. I know many young people, and while I say this, I say it as a very difficult time because I have a young man actually who's a good friend and a supporter who's lying in the morgue as we speak. He used to work at an M-Pesa shop, went to some betting site, I'm told it's called Aviator. You know, when I was told the story, Mr. Speaker, then I realized that I have grown old. I think because I sit amongst people who are older than me, I've always imagined that I'm still young. But the reality is dawning on me that there are many things that I don't know, things that could not be said of a few years back. So I hear there is a betting, either platform or whatever, and when they placed their bet there, they lost over 120,000. Money which would otherwise be referred to as a float of the shop they were running. And since they feared the owner of the shop, they decided to take their own life. The story is replicated across the country. Many, either offline or online betting sites that are available and are being now used by young people, because with the absence of, when you bet on, say, an M-Pesa or a locally regulated platform, the tax revenue people are able to keep track of what you're doing and therefore are able to recover this tax. But many of these young people, I have pointed out, Mr. Speaker, are now betting online and paying using either their cards or whatever other forms of payment, Madam Speaker, using channels that are unknown to the government, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, even our regulation of the same is limited. And this is, again, like I have pointed out, not a challenge unique to Kenya. These gaming sites are so advanced in their gaming machines such that even if you are to block their IP address, they have the ability to generate a new one within seconds. Countries that are far more advanced than us technologically, Mr. Speaker, have not been able to successfully regulate it. Therefore, this is an attempt to shift our thinking and know that because it is almost impossible to deter, because betting is a matter of personal choice, people decide to either bet or not to bet. And therefore, you must make ways of living and surviving with this phenomena that is here with us, Mr. Speaker, so that you're in a position and are able to either control, manage it, Mr. Speaker, or guide it in a way that provides a good platform for you as an administration or as a government, Mr. Speaker, to regulate this activity. Therefore, this bill is providing us with this framework, Mr. Speaker, because of the challenge that I have just explained. Issues of tax evasion, issues of underage gambling. Any person today with an access to the computer, Mr. Speaker, can actually participate in gambling activities. Because, like I have pointed out, some of these sites are actually online, and there is no regulation on age, who can access these sites and who cannot, Mr. Speaker. There is also, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that there are very enhanced monitoring mechanisms for these gaming initiatives, it is crucial at this time to create a safe, fair, and socially responsible gaming environment. Basically an admission, like the rest of the world has had to do, that gambling is here to stay with us. And there are people who will gamble either way. Therefore, the best thing to do is for you to set up a fair and a good environment and regulate it properly, Mr. Speaker, so that it is done in a manner that you can keep sight, keep track, be able to assist people if there are issues of addiction, for example, place the responsibility. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I was hoping, because further down the bill, and I have taken time to quickly scan through the report of the Departmental Committee on Labor, and the chair is here, he can correct me if I'm wrong. I was hoping that we could actually impose certain responsibilities socially on these gaming companies, such that if you have an addict, by law in other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, in other jurisdictions that have understood this concept, what they do is that there is a percentage of their revenue that is purely dedicated, Mr. Speaker, into managing, Mr. Speaker, addictions. And you're forced that go through your systems, check if Senator Osotsi make this much and is spending a particular amount on gambling, then you are flagged by the system and they are able to tell and say this particular individual is living dangerously in the gambling space, and therefore they organize conferences for you and some training on their own budget as a gambling company. That demand is placed on you. It is my sincere hope that perhaps, maybe even as we discuss this bill, people can think about how to make better demands from this company so that we don't end up having many young people losing their opportunity. Mr. Speaker, we know that even as we struggled, for example, you know, I don't want to mention the name so that I'm not accused of using, in Tanzania, just next door here. And because Tanzania as a country managed this issue better than us, today that company does almost 10 times the revenue they used to do when they were here in Kenya, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that Kenyans are known to have more disposable income than our colleagues in Tanzania. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, they sponsor their local leagues in many sports. Part of the teams that they sport participate even in the African Champions League and go as far as the semis and the quarterfinals on account of prudent use of these resources that have been generated. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, like I have observed, as a country, we must make a decision and know how to live with this industry rather than to try and curtail it. Because if there is a lesson that we have learned the last few years, excuse me, then it is that you cannot curtail the operations of this industry. You can only learn how to do it better. There is an idea, Mr. Speaker, that is proposed in the bill, which is to establish clear guidelines on how you protect also consumers from exploitation. I've explained that. And also you combat issues of money laundering. Gambling companies and gaming casinos, Mr. Speaker, are avenues that have been used as well to money launder, you know, and therefore it is important to regulate this environment. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the creation of the Gambling Regulatory Authority will provide an oversight and enforcement promoting a safer gambling environment. Additionally, the authorization of prize competition and public lotteries will offer opportunities for economic growth and entertainment. Further, the imposition of tax on betting and gambling activities will generate significant revenue for public and social services initiative, which ultimately will benefit us as a country. You know that there has been an attempt to do this through the sports fund, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, previously, even after the setting up of the sports fund, 80% of that funds were used to do other things that are non-sporting related. I am particularly impressed that in one of the executive orders of 2023, the President did direct that the sports fund be wholly dedicated for use of development of sporting facilities, and that's part of what is being used to expand the sporting arenas across the country. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'll quickly just scan through the various sections of the law. Part 1 of the bill provides for the preliminary matters, which are interpretations, the terms that are being used. Of course, Parts 2 and Part 3, all the way to Part 5, Mr. Speaker, provide for the various functions, laying out what are the functions of the national government in terms of policy, what are the functions of the county governments in terms of regulating and controlling places like casinos. You know very well that there are village casinos nowadays. And colleague senators, you must keep vigil and be vigilant even in your various counties, because people are setting up funny joints, and there are not very impressive videos that are coming out of the activities that happen in such places. Those are duties actually of our county governments, and it's good that this is being provided. A county government is being reminded of their core responsibilities where they regulate even the operation and give local licensing for this casino. Part 4 of the bill, Madam Speaker, which consists of clause 26, 6 to 7, it provides for the establishment now of this authority. What are their functions, what are the operations, the guidelines, how they'll conduct the business, pretty much what we do when we set up any board, as we have done. Clause 28 to 49, Mr. Speaker, provide on issues of licensing and permits. But clause 50 to 57, it provides also for the control of the lotteries, Madam Speaker. Part 7 of the bill, which is clause 64 to 66, provides the provisions on casino, slot machines that are all over, littered across the country. You find, Mr. Speaker, in the villages, these things are becoming a sin, where in village centers at 4 o'clock you find women and men trooping, all of them, and sometimes dropping all their day's earnings into some funny box, hoping to strike wealth or sudden wealth, Mr. Speaker. And most of the time, very little happens or comes out of it, Mr. Speaker. Part 8 of the bill, which is clause 67 to 80, provides for online gambling, including licensing, control, payment of prizes, and remittance of winning, financial reporting, and dispute resolution. This is one of the hardest, and I've explained why. Because of the complexity of the online machine and engines that these people use that can generate even new IP addresses within minutes of closing the other, Mr. Speaker, and young people are able to access. Remember, we lead a very tech-savvy society nowadays, Mr. Speaker, and therefore they are able to move quite quickly and resolve these issues. Part 10 of the bill, which is clause 87, provides the guidelines for advertising. Where can you do these adverts, how to do them, so that you don't expose it to our young children, Mr. Speaker. It is important to guide how this is done without necessarily as well curtailing the business activities. Because like I pointed out, Mr. Speaker, even as we try as a country to regulate and become difficult and hard at these activities, the rest of the world move way ahead of us and are taking advantage. There are billions of money that leaves this country on a yearly basis, Mr. Speaker, that are funding the social and prosperous activities of other societies, because we have not been able to do what this bill is asking us to do, where we imagine we can curtail an industry such as this. Part 12 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, which is clause 92 to 111, are just provisions of the offenses and the penalties for violations of the various clauses of this bill. Part 13 contains miscellaneous provisions and translation. Clause 92, Mr. Speaker, and allow me to read it. I found it quite interesting, which is about a person who, being the owner or occupier of a licensed gambling premise or electronic site, who allows such premise to be used for other unlicensed activities. What is the fine? Only 1 million shillings. I hope the committee can move away from this. I have said times without number that, unfortunately, at state law office, or sometimes even here in Parliament, people, I think, copy-paste certain sections of law and just paste it there without reflection. It is an abuse of our legislative mandate also as parliamentarians for you to come and pass a law. You know how much money we are talking about here. And you're saying that tomorrow, if I went and opened a casino on Gong Road, and I'm minting millions illegally, then the only fine that I can be charged by law is 1 million shillings. You know what I'll do? I will never even pay for the license. I will tell you, fine me every day. Because they make more than 1 million every day. Therefore, I hope that as our committee, sometimes you go through many of these bills. Don't just tick the boxes. I have said it many times that many of these people don't reflect and internalize what laws we are passing. And I hope that as a house, we can rise up above this and set a fine that somebody knows that indeed, if you engage in certain illegal activities, then there is a consequence to it. Some of these industries are worth billions. Therefore, when you tell a Russian mobster who has come and set up something here, Mr. Speaker, that the only match you can find them is 1 million shillings, then they are excited and they say, oh, well, that's only 365 million in a year, while they make far more than that. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I hope when we come to committee of the whole, Mr. Speaker, we shall be able to vary the fine. Senator Osotsi, you are normally very good at drafting amendments. I hope you are taking notes and will be able to help us as a house to do this better. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I want to hear the opinions of colleagues. I also want to point out another area that I have noted as having challenge with the drafting, is where boards are being set up and there is only one slot for a representative of COG, all the 47 counties. And committees of the House bring their report and they are okay with it. I am not okay with that. It's not about saying, I don't serve in committees. It is you members that serve in committees. I want reports of committees already amending those provisions. And I will support you. Because it's unfair that you have the PS for Treasury, you have the PS I don't know for what, you have the representative of AG, all people who are thinking in a particular way, facing off against one individual to represent the interest of counties. It's not fair. We are failing in our duty as a Senate. And I expect that when, as a committee, you have a responsibility to go through a legislation such as this, you don't return to the House a report okaying such provisions. Reduce. I have told you many of these boards, people just sit down and they copy and paste without applying their minds and appreciating that Kenya has since moved. Devolved system of government is here with us to stay. And therefore, I hope that when we are considering such legislations, Mr. Speaker, I will see at least near equal, if not equal, number of representatives between the national and the county governments, especially if it is a body that will oversee operations of activities that touch on the functions of both counties and national government. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request the Senator for Nandi, Senator Samson Cherargei, who probably knows what aviator site is because he's younger than me, to second. He's a gambler, I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to congratulate the Majority Leader, Senator Aaron Cheruiyot and Kericho Senator, for this bill. And just on a lighter touch, that I hope he talks to the Majority Leader of National Assembly to be fast-tracking our bills the way we do here religiously. Mr. Speaker, you know, the only time I've interacted with gambling is when listening to the Gayle Rogers, the country minister, the coward of the county, Mr. Speaker. And every gambler has its own day and time, Mr. Speaker, as the coward of the county says. And you know, when you are listening to sound donors, especially on a Sunday evening, then that is when we interact with gambling, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, I want to say in opening remarks in quick succession that I think it is high time that we bring order and sanity in the sector of gambling. I remember in the last session, the Ministry of Interior brought an omnibus of trying to amend on the taxation of winnings, and it became a big problem because even at that time, the company by the name SportPesa, among other Betika and others, were complaining because they felt that they were being double taxed, but they were not declaring their winnings at that time. And looking into the future, Mr. Speaker, can you protect me from the commissioners who have a problem at hand or with the Bunge Towers? Mr. Speaker, I don't want to go there. I know they are firefighting, Mr. Speaker, after I came gun blessings today at midday, so they are firefighting. Mr. Speaker, that is why we need to bring order in the sector. And Mr. Speaker, the only problem we have been having is that government does not know what gambling is doing, gamblers do, and the gambling companies, and then the gambling itself are not honest. I know in other religions it is not good or best practices, Mr. Speaker, to gamble, and we respect that. But with widening our tax base network, in fact, we should tax as part of deterrent measure the issue of gambling process and gamblers, Mr. Speaker, especially on winnings, so that we instead of taxing other essentials, we increase in taxation. Even, and I know the reason Senator Faki is excited, Mr. Speaker, is we need to tax more on the gamblers, because if you are gambling, you have already had your essentials. You have already had your basics, Mr. Speaker. But the sad reality is that, Mr. Speaker, is that most young people, and I know us, all of us here, who are politicians, will receive a message saying, send me 30 shillings, send me 200 shillings, send me 1,000 shillings. You can know, for people who are experts in gambling, will always know that that person intends to gamble. It's not about food, but it is about that how to gamble, Mr. Speaker. And you know, as addictive as the years, while we say condolences to Senator Aaron and the people of Kericho over a young man who I think he lost over 250,000 through gambling, 150,000, sorry, thank you for that correction. And he had to commit suicide. So you can imagine this is a very serious issue. Just the way shisha and gambling are the same, it's addictive, just like any other desires. Mr. Speaker, on clause number 4, I agree 4G on the issue of conducting anti-money laundering and risk-based inspections, because yesterday, Mr. Speaker, courtesy of your office and your support, during the open governance, and you know we are having regional meeting in Nairobi, and His Excellency the President being the patron, as we launch plan number 5 or National Action Plan in legislative openness. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya is in gray in terms of illicit money. It has been found that Kenya, on the issue of money laundering, it has become a big problem, Mr. Speaker, and we are on the gray. And I want to advise the country that this issue of money laundering and illicit money in the economy, we must be very careful, because the moment we are blacklisted, you can never trade outside this country and outside Africa. So it's a serious issue. I agree we must look at the money laundering. Mr. Speaker, I remember in few years when the issue of piracy money came, it became a serious issue where the country became, until we enacted an anti-money laundering law. So I agree that there should be a way so that this issue of gambling, Mr. Speaker, cannot be used to launder the proceeds of illicit money and money laundering, Mr. Speaker. As you are aware, in Brazil many years ago, and Brazil is a very beautiful country. I've been there on several occasions, especially on issues of agriculture and other issues, Mr. Speaker. I don't want colleagues to look at me suspiciously, but on issues of agriculture, imports of machinery, Mr. Speaker, that is the beauty about Brazil. I don't look at other things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was what we call car wash scandal in Brazil, where some senior government officials in allegations of corruption used to steal money to use in a car wash. Interestingly, the story has it, it was next to the government buildings that is are using this, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I agree with that, Mr. Speaker, so that I allow other colleagues in seconding this motion, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue of clause number 64, so that I just make 3 comments on the issue of may granted to operate a casino and other forms. I think this one we need to agree that, you know, Mr. Speaker, where should we put these gambling machines? Should we put next to a shopkeeper? Should we put next to the to where maize is being crushed? I know in Viga, where Senator Outsourcing comes from, Mr. Speaker, when you put a casino and a maize milling machine, there is no problem. But in other areas, if you do that, somebody can go without food. So, and others, we have had cases, Mr. Speaker, where eggs are disappearing mysteriously because people are stealing eggs, go and sell, and then come. There is a famous one, Mr. Speaker, that was common. A small one that looks like yellow, and it was, I think, made in China, where a lot of eggs were being lost in the villages because people were, young men and women were just taking it. And so the question should be, what should we do? For example, the number and geographic, the way we have done, Mr. Speaker, with the zoning of bars and illicit near to schools, we must agree where to put. I think the presence of a tourist in a county like Mombasa, your county, Mr. Speaker, Kilifi, Kwale, among others, it should be cultural and religious distribution, Mr. Speaker. I said that earlier on, especially there are some religions who abhor the use of gambling, Mr. Speaker. The incidents and social consequences of compulsive and addictive gambling, I think there is an addiction. And Mr. Speaker, according to World Health Organization, addiction is not a disease. It's a disease, it's not an offense. And even, Mr. Speaker, I agree with Senate Majority Leader, Senator Aaron, when he says that the gambling companies must undertake even building rehabilitation or programs, Mr. Speaker. The way we are demanding of people who sell illicit brew and drugs that they must develop rehab centers, so that this gambling is another addiction. There are young people who do not, if they don't bet, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, to be honest, I know many young people might not find this comfortable. But are you aware in this city and across the country, there are young people who only bet and survive on betting's earnings, Mr. Speaker, in rent, living large. When you go to Kilimani and some of these estates, you see them parking LX 600, Mr. Speaker, living large, wearing expensive watches and clothes, designer, Mr. Speaker, and kupiga sherehe all over, Mr. Speaker. Some of them are doing it based on earnings, but it is not predictable. We are not saying, but yes, we are regulating the sector. And then if you win, we must tax you so that we can get, so that when you buy your LX 600, you get a good road to drive on and get water in your apartment, or even get the affordable housing that the president wants to push, Mr. Speaker. So, in fact, job creation, I think, Mr. Speaker, and I saw a company in Westlands here. We must also bring order, Mr. Speaker, because some young people who we interact with daily, they win. But when they go to the company to claim, I'm trying to get the name in Westlands, that gambling company, Mr. Speaker, they refuse to give you your money after winning. So where is the recourse? Mr. Speaker, you are one of the senior fine lawyers in this republic. Counsel is seated opposite you. Is that, you know, they say when you go to Koinange or other places and you decide to quench your desires, when you don't pay in courts, you cannot run to court to demand payment for such services because it is considered illegal, immoral, and unlawful. So does the gambling in some of the culture and religion, Mr. Speaker, does...
Senator Fernande, would you wish to be informed by the Senator from Mombasa?
No, I look comfortable with him today to inform me.
Proceed, Senator Fight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My learned friend, Senator Chergey, is not aware that courts are now very hard on those who consume fare without traveling. Thank you.
He's a victim of his fare being eaten.
Mr. Speaker, I think when you allow some of this point of information and order, somebody must staple a proof. Because looking at Senator Faki through, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't look like somebody who can give out a fare. In fact, I don't think so. But I agree with him, if that is people who are eating fare in this town, I think court should take seriously. I agree with him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, we must agree on enforcement, ownership, and therefore, many young people do their winnings, but they are not being paid, Mr. Speaker. On clause number, in the issue of licensing, I think I agree largely, and we should ensure, Mr. Speaker, I think the biggest challenge, and Senate Majority Leader should note this, we need to do what we call a whole government approach of a one-stop where you can access license. Because nowadays, Mr. Speaker, when you visit a kiosk somewhere in Kirinyaga Road or Mukuru kwa Njenga, you find the wall is mosaic because of number of licensing. So I don't know what we need to do, especially when you are using licensing. While I agree with the principle, we make it efficient so that the people who issue license like county governments or national do not take advantage. Because nowadays you get a license of public health, NEMA license, license to gamble, for example, gambling license. How should we make it one-stop shop so that it becomes easy to access some of these licenses, Mr. Speaker? And of course, we don't want to open an avenue, Mr. Speaker, as per clause 65, 66, to open an avenue where some officers, enforcement will take advantage, Mr. Speaker. Clause number 6, and this will be my two closing, is online gambling. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to check on online because sometimes they force you to see an advert. I know there is agreement with YouTube and in terms of the advert, but it should be an optional. So, Mr. Speaker, when you open YouTube or you open social media or a page, they want you to watch it for 5 seconds, which I always find it unfair because you don't want to watch, maybe you wanted to watch Senate proceedings, for example, live, Mr. Speaker, but when they just insist on you watching an advert. So it must be either they are paying taxes to government to do that advert, or they give you an option, Mr. Speaker, because also I've been questioning the role of Consumer Protection and Competition Authority of Kenya, which is just across Technical University of Kenya. What are they doing about competition authority, competition engagement, protection engagement of consumers? We need protection, Mr. Speaker. And license, I agree with online bookmakers, online lottery license, and casino license, Mr. Speaker, so that it becomes easy. And I agree with Senator Aaron that we need to enhance fine. You know, I've told you these people who do gambling are very wealthy people. I remember, Mr. Speaker, when we wanted to do amendments on winnings, this Senate and both Parliament, National Assembly and the Senate, it became hard to move because, of course, the interest that gambling sector has in terms of the laws that we have. So on the licensing, I agree so that we are protected, Mr. Speaker. And even TikTok, I remember when the president pushed on the earnings on online, and I think it is in line with the president what he has been saying, that you can earn online, but we also have license so that we can track winnings and ensure that there is taxation, Mr. Speaker. And also, Mr. Speaker, there is one thing I wanted to mention about these people who run social media. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, and X, nowadays Twitter is called X, and TikTok, Mr. Speaker, is that, you know, most of these companies are operated abroad. Mr. Speaker, there is a systematic discrimination from some of these organizations. That when people who are in Africa complain against, for example, X Corporation, or against TikTok, or against YouTube, or against Facebook, or against Instagram, Mr. Speaker, they don't respond to the complaints, yet most of those accounts are verified and you pay for. But people like X Corporation, for example, Twitter, they don't respond to it, Mr. Speaker, just like YouTube. And yet, those accounts that Kenyans own or Africans own are verified and they are paid for. But somebody who is in US and Europe, when they complain to those organizations and corporations, Mr. Speaker, they take it seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope as we do this, in terms of licensing, we should not be doing PR where when the government wants to issue license, because they own the domains of those applications, Mr. Speaker, they should not take advantage and they should avoid discrimination in terms of addressing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on number 71, in conclusion, I can see my time is 71, clause number 71, to a gambling advertisement shall indicate the addictive nature of gambling. We want them to, but you can imagine people who bet and they don't win, Mr. Speaker. Those people need rehabilitation because some of those people even don't have in job centers on Mondays. So we must indicate. In fact, notify players to play responsibly, prohibit children from playing. I think we have an obligation, especially on online bullying to children. And a number of us have children, and they are very young. This exposure of social media and online, Mr. Speaker, is dangerous to children. We must have protective mechanism. And I'm happy there is a bill by Senator Ogola on newborn and other issues of children. We must look at the children and the law and protect our children from this exposure. The way we protect them from not watching pornographic online movies and other things, we must ensure that even we put an app, Mr. Speaker, that when you want to key in, they request for your age. For example, Kenya is 18 years. So they ask you, how old are you, those details, your email address, date of birth, in that app, so that when you key in, if I'm 16 years old and I cannot key in Gmail or my age, then I don't automatically access that site. That is what I mean for members who are still analog to understand what we mean. And I know senior youth leader, Senator Oburu Odinga, is following closely. Mr. Speaker, and then of course I agree on the watershed period in the TV. We need to ensure watershed period is provided for. Mr. Speaker, this bill has a lot of good things. I cannot go through it. I want to listen also to colleagues. There is a lot in this bill. We need to bring discipline and order within the sector. And congratulate Majority Leader Senator Aaron Cheruyat for bringing this. I think, colleagues, we need to fast track this bill and ensure that the President assents so that we can bring order in the industry. We can get more taxes to sustain our economy. With those very, very remarks, Mr. Speaker, allow me to end there, and I will request to second, Mr. Speaker, and I'll request to see Commissioner Senior Counsel Okongo Mugeni nyuma ya tent after this, so that we can resolve a few matters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Now, honorable senators, I will proceed to propose the question, which is that the Gambling Control Bill, National Assembly Bills number 70 of 2023, be now read a second time. Honorable Sifuna.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first of a series of bills that have come before this House that I will not start by objecting to on constitutional principles. It's one of those few that have come before this House recognizing that, in fact, this is a national government function. So you will not hear me complain as much about the composition of a board that the majority leader was speaking to, as I have done in other bills that have come before this House that were essentially regulating matters that I believe are devolved functions. Number two, Mr. Speaker, I've had very interesting conversations with young people in this country. One of the things, I'm a grown-up, spending my own money. What business do you have as a legislator in my life? Mr. Speaker, this is one of those other legislations. And I want to speak as a person who has won money on numerous occasions on account of Arsenal losing. Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm that I have placed a bet on this tonight's game against Bayern Munich, because I know Arsenal are going to lose. And so as a friend of members of this House, I encourage you to make a little money today because Arsenal is going to lose again. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Sifuna, there is a point of order from Senator Karen Nyamu. Close in.
Mr. Speaker, I have in this House presented my issue with Aluta. It is about our young people. Is the Senator for Nairobi in order to imply that I'm trying to regulate grown-ups from partying whenever they want to? And also, in the House, Mr. Speaker, because the comeback that we are about to put up, he will silence him forever.
Yes, Senator Sifuna, you cannot bring issues to do with Arsenal without bringing a substantive motion. Substantive motion. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, you want me to bring a substantive motion to discuss Arsenal? But the point that I was making, Mr. Speaker, and this is something that the majority leader alluded to, is that some of these things are personal choices. Although this facility is available for everyone, not everybody engages in gambling. But what we should not do, Mr. Speaker, I have seen this very worrying trend where we want to demonize and criminalize everything so that Sherehe is being painted as something that is very evil and somehow that it is targeting young people. Mr. Speaker, we have laws on our books to prevent operators of a club, just like this law that we are debating this afternoon. It has restrictions on the age limits of the people who can participate. There is a restriction on the age of persons who can enter into a club in Nairobi or anywhere else, Mr. Speaker. So that having the rules there should be sufficient for us not to criminalize the activities. We are trying to make sure that the activity is conducted in a manner that is safe, in a manner that does not endanger the lives of people or in fact jeopardize the future of young people. Mr. Speaker, I went through the fourth schedule to ascertain that, in fact, this is a function that can properly be undertaken by the national government. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the submissions by the majority leader, I think that is one of the speeches by the majority leader that has earned him applause from our side, because he has been saying about legislation that comes before this House. Not least amongst them is the need for leaders, members of parliament and members of the committees to consider bills before passing them, to read bills before passing them. I was very happy to hear him say that, because we've been sounding like madmen, some of us, when we insist that in this House we must consider bills, we must read bills and debate them, be given sufficient time to debate them. So I'm very happy that the majority leader is echoing those sentiments, Mr. Speaker, so that we can be able to my analysis of the bill with Section 5. One of the problems I've always had with some of the legislation we pass in various sections, 2 of the bill, and this is something that Senator Cherargei was worried about. I can see that it has provided that a person licensed to carry on online gambling activity shall conduct activity under a gambling control system approved by the authority, and that the authority cannot approve a system under that subsection unless you as a licensee provide, amongst other things, at subsection 2G there, responsible advertising. So what he was concerned about is something I think the legislation has already anticipated and provided for. Then, Mr. Speaker, at section 69 of the bill, there is a definition on when the online transaction begins and when it ends. And there is a number of days, a minimum number of days that is provided for your payout to be made. So, Mr. Speaker, the concerns by Senator Cherargei that you can actually win money and the people or the betting firm refuses to remit that money is something that has also been anticipated in this particular bill, and I believe it has also been properly taken care of. I would want someone to explain to me the rationale of the minimum betting at section 71, that in fact the minimum bet has been set at 20 shillings, Mr. Speaker, and that is inclusive of a saving component. If you bet 20 shillings, there's an amount of money that is set aside as savings for you by the ministry, I guess, or by the authority. And Mr. Speaker, that the minimum bet is set at 20 shillings. I would want some clarification from the committee, I think, during the debate on what that is about. Mr. Speaker, if you go to section 72, subsection 3, you will see what I was telling you about the need for us not to appear as if there are gaps already in legislation when it comes to protecting young people. If you read section 72, subsection 3, you see that an operator is made to require proof of age of majority prior to the registration of every player. So you cannot register as a player on an online betting site without having produced proof of your being of age of majority. So, Mr. Speaker, for me really, other than some of the concerns that have been raised by the majority leader on the adequacy of the fines for some of the penalties that have been prescribed, I believe that generally, this is one of the few pieces of legislation that have come before this House that I have minimum problems with, and that in fact, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage us not to be in the business of demonizing everything and making everything appear unholy and ungodly, especially when it comes to choices that are being made by grown people. If indeed the feeling of Parliament is that a person of the age of 18 or any other age should probably not be exposed to some of these things, Mr. Speaker, it is very much in order for us to require even a higher age. If you say somebody to participate in gambling has to be above 30 or 40, it is possible for us as a House to do this. But for me, I don't condemn without asking myself, what are the systemic problems that have given root to some of this abuse of some of these practices and some people ending up even addicted in some of these things? Mr. Speaker, the underlying socio-economic factors are in fact the things that we as a House and leaders have to address. Somebody who has finished university 10 years ago has never got an opportunity to be employed anywhere. They have degrees, they have all these things. They need to eat, they need a place to sleep. Who are you who has failed to provide that environment where they can sustain themselves and pay for their expenses? Who are you to judge that person when they decide that if I make 50 shillings, I'm going to put 20 shillings on Arsenal losing this afternoon? Mr. Speaker, it is not right for us as leaders, especially when we have not been able to address the socio-economic challenges of our young people, to then judge people and say, these people who engage in gambling are evil. Who are you, who has never provided any opportunity for people to be employed, to judge a person who has nowhere to go on Monday morning, Mr. Speaker? There is no office for them to go. If they decide to go and listen to reggae the whole day at Aluta, who are you? Who are you to judge that person and say, oh, this is something that is evil and should be stopped? I think we need to end the hypocrisy in these things. As leaders, let us address the underlying socioeconomic issues, first of all. Because a person who's meaningfully employed, like I can see Commissioner there, Commissioner's diary, Mr. Speaker, is full from morning to evening, 24 days, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, 365 days a week. And if we factor in the difficult travel schedule Mr. Speaker, she has no time. She has simply no time to engage in some of this. She can't be seen at Aluta because she has work to do. So let us focus on the socio-economic issues, Mr. Speaker, and then we can then talk about all the other issues. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute.
Honorable Senators, as we contribute to this bill, today evening there are so many youth who will be watching the game between Arsenal and Bayern Munich. Arsenal has the highest fan base. Therefore, you might be addressing people who are even, you know, some of the fans even kill themselves when teams lose. So when the Senate the afternoon will be talking about Arsenal losing, then we are talking to the youth out there in a very negative way. So senators, avoid giving examples to that match specifically because of our youth who are out there waiting for the game in the evening. Senator Joe Nyutu. Okay, I can see you are not trained for this, but you're on top of the list. Senator Oloba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to take note that the Committee of Labour, the Labour Committee, went through this bill and gave a report on it. And Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to interact with some of the issues that were highlighted by the stakeholders who are affected by the repealing of the Gambling Act and now being replaced with this bill. Mr. Speaker, one thing I want to highlight is that when we were talking to the stakeholders, of course, and this is the different departments, KRA, we had CRA there, we had Sports Fund, all these people who would be affected directly, all these institutions that would be affected directly by this bill. Mr. Speaker, one thing came out very clearly is that there is a lot of money in gambling. In fact, too much money, Mr. Speaker, to an extent that it was an issue of deciding what percentage of the levy would go to which specific institution, Mr. Speaker. A clear example is we had the members of Sports Fund and the CEO come in to say that, in fact, there is a particular section of the new bill that takes away more than 16 billion from the Sports Fund. Earlier on, the levies would be collected and a big percentage of it would go to Sports Fund to be able to give, facilitate the activities that Sports Fund has, including sporting activities, supporting artists, supporting our young athletes, and all that stuff. So while this bill was being drafted, I think there was an oversight, and they forgot to include the percentage that should still remain in the Sports Fund. So when Sports Fund came to the Labour Committee, they explained this. And Mr. Speaker, one thing that I questioned and I asked them is, yes, this money is generated from sports. This money is generated from gambling, mainly within sporting activity. Do they mean to say that in the absence of gambling, the whole sports fund, because 90% of the sports fund budget comes from gambling? So my question then was, if we were to ban gambling in this country, would we also fold the sports fund? And what would that mean then also for the athletes and the sporting activities that are relying heavily on gambling? And, you know, I know it is an issue of the chicken or the egg, you know, but for me, it was imperative to understand that above and beyond relying on gambling money to be able to support sporting activities, we need to think as a country beyond that. We need to start thinking of income-generating activities around that industry. For instance, look at what some of our notable runners are doing, opening all these training facilities, these training camps, and turning it into a sports tourism kind of economic activity. And those are the things that I was questioning all the stakeholders, asking them, in the absence of gambling, are you going to fold up those institutions? So as much as we are happy, and I've heard Senator Sifuna referencing that we should not regulate, that we are too much on rules, and that, you know, people should be led to be free. No, Mr. Speaker. There is a very, very thin line between an organized society that is responsible for its people and anarchy. So when we are legislating, we are not legislating because we want to get into people's houses to control them. We are legislating because there is a fact here that gambling is destroying our communities. That is a fact. Gambling is actually the source of so many ill activities, the source of so much sorrow in so many households. Women out here are literally having to deal with not only the issue of their spouses having substance abuse, but with the issue of gambling. So as responsible legislators, I want to say that we are not entering the private spaces of people to control who and what they believe in, but what we are doing is we want to be responsible leaders to ensure that even within your freedoms, we are still able to safeguard, for instance, our children. And I'm glad that Senator Karen Nyamu has stood up to clarify that her bill, and even the motion that we were discussing here on Aluta, has nothing to do with adults, but it has everything to do with parents, parenting, and ensuring that our children have safe spaces. Because any child who's under, any person who's under the age of 18 years does not have the capacity. They think they have the capacity, but they do not have the capacity to make decisions to a certain extent. That is why we always say they have to have guardians, they have to have parents, they have to have someone who is responsible for them. So I think it is completely responsible for us as leaders to say that, listen, if you are earning this and you want to spend all of it on gambling, who are we to come in and say yes or no? Yes, it is your freedom, but what we are doing is ensuring that within this space of gambling, there has to be some order in that disorder. Because if you ask me, gambling is a disorder. But okay, we all have rights and there's freedoms. So in this disorder, how then can we ensure that we are responsibly safeguarding the lives of citizens, Mr. Speaker? To hear that a Kenyan, a youthful Kenyan, has actually committed suicide because they've lost a little bit more than 100,000 on gambling, that in itself should touch the minds and the souls of the senators in this house, so that they understand that as much as we are adults, some of us still need to be guided. And that is why within a county, we still elect a governor to be able to lead the people. We still elect a senator to be able to lead the people. Otherwise, we would also say, all these people are adults, they can lead themselves. So I strongly believe that this bill is very timely. And I believe above and beyond the issue of organizing the taxes that are being collected on gambling, it is an issue of trying to direct a society back into the moral path that we need to be in. And when I say moral path, I'm not talking about religion, I'm not talking about biases, I'm talking about some level of financial management within our homes, Mr. Speaker. There are a lot of women and men who are literally sinking the family unit because of gambling. There are children who are being thrown out of schools because their parents have gambled the last coin. There are women who are literally holding on to their last coin because their spouses have gambled everything on. You're talking about the match tonight between Arsenal and Alu. I'm not a football fan. But there are people who would rather say tonight, my family doesn't need to eat meat, because this 250 shillings, I want to place a bet. So in all fairness, this has nothing to do with controlling people and the decisions they make with what they want to do. This has everything to do with the responsibility of us leaders ensuring that our communities are not washed away with the ills of gambling. Mr. Speaker, when we had this conversation with the sports fund, after I questioned them, because it was 16 billion Kenya shillings that they were fighting for to be maintained within the sports fund. You know, 3% of the levies that are collected will go towards the gambling authority. That 3% will cater for the administrative and logistics of running that authority. And then the remaining amount of money, if you go through the bill, will be channeled to various places. Among them, the person that gets the lion's share is sports fund, if we actually get that amendment passed. Mr. Speaker, then I asked a question to sports fund. What is your mandate? Their mandate is to cater for sporting activities, because it is an independent state agency, but above and beyond that, they actually have some level of responsibility to push the creative economy, Mr. Speaker. And there was a kind of discussion like, yes, you know, our athletes. I said, you're talking about athletes. What about the creative economy? What about the creative economy? Because you have a mandate within that institution to take care of singers, of filmmakers, of all these people in the creative economy. And I could tell from even Waziri Ababu Namamba's response that the creative economy was not really prioritized. It was more about football. So, and I remember Senator Crystal Asige being in that meeting saying, it is very unfortunate that the misrepresentation of even the leadership in the various spaces is causing us to forget repeatedly about the creative economy, about our culture, about how we are going to conserve our cultural activities. Mr. Speaker, one of the amendments that I would like to have pushed within this bill is that, and not the bill, but you know, after the bill is passed, we are going to get to a place where regulations of anchored to the bill will be tabled. One of the regulations that I would really want to see, and I'm going to push for, is that from that 16 billion plus, 50% of that money should be directed to the creative economy, Mr. Speaker. It is not fair that every day, day in and out, we are talking about football. Even when you're talking about sporting activities, you're still leaning towards one bias, which is football, Mr. Speaker. So for me, I am happy that the committee adopted the proposed amendment to ensure that the fund that was going to the sports fund would still be maintained and go to the sports fund. And the next step would be to ensure that the regulations that will be anchored to this bill will push for 50% of the 16 billion to go to the creative economy. And in that sense, then, we will be able to have some preservation of our culture through this ill, because again, I call it an ill, this ill that we are choosing to legislate called gambling. Mr. Speaker, there was an issue earlier on about all these betting companies finding very many creative ways to avoid paying taxes. The first creative way was that they would say, once we are done with all our gambling for the month, we will sit down, see the money that we have made, and then we will report our taxes and pay our taxes. And then an imperative question was asked. If a person is betting, let's say 50 shillings on a game tonight, why do you, as a betting company, have to wait until the end of the month to pay your 16% or 3% or whatever levy? There was absolutely no reason. And I'm glad that this bill is now addressing that, because now you pay your 50 shillings, the money that hits the account to the betting authority, the betting company, is the money that they need to get, but the taxes go directly to the tax collector. And in that sense, then, we are not having any arguments towards the end of the month talking about you made 3 billion and you're only paying taxes this much. It becomes a very fair and easy calculation, because truly If the taxman is asking for 3% or 16%, then it is 3% or 16% of the 50 shillings that I am betting. So in essence, that money should not even be stored with that betting company. It should go directly to the tax collector. So that as much as we are now accepting this ill called gambling, we are also saying, okay, our economy can also benefit from the income that is coming from gambling. Because in that sense then, it makes work very easy for the tax authority. They don't need to have to sit down at the end of the month and follow people and everything. So, and that's one of the other reasons why I'm supporting this bill. And Mr. Speaker, there was an issue of the authorities who are going to enforce the activities that are governing this bill. For instance, you have all these city council or KRA agents coming in, shutting you down, and then confiscating your machine or your equipments. And there was never really any legislation about what happens when you take my machine. And who, because that machine sometimes has my personal data as a gambler, as a client. So you find an authority comes in, they sweep the house, they take all the machines, and then you are involved in these negotiations between, do I have a license, have I been authorized? In the meantime, that machine that has the data of the end user is sitting somewhere very vulnerable to data trading. So when I read some of the proposals that are there and how they would handle issues around confiscation of these machines, and then I thought, yes, we need also that to be organized, because sometimes even the machines that are confiscated, the authorities that are with them end up selling those machines, and you know, it becomes a whole other array of a lot of things. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I would like to say that interrogating this bill got me to learn a lot about the money that is made in gambling, how the money is handled, and how we can do better. I am also very excited that there will be a percentage, and we will make sure that it is anchored on the regulation, that there will be a percentage of the money, of the income, of the taxes, that will be channeled towards rehabilitation of our young people and the addicts of gambling. Because at the end of the day, some level of responsibility has to be taken by these same companies in terms of rehabilitating people who are completely addicted to gambling. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I would like to say that I support this bill, and I look forward to seeing the regulations being tabled at my committee, the Committee of Delegated Legislation. Thank you.
Next is Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Wambua Enoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to make a contribution to this bill, the Gambling Control Bill of 2023, a government bill from the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, before I go to the contents of the bill, allow me, Mr. Speaker, to say that gambling has actually become a near menace in this country. Both young people and adults need a reserve of the national government by this bill. And that the county governments, the only role that they have in receiving money from people who set up gambling houses. The Speaker, as a house that is responsible for fighting for devolution, one of the biggest conversations that we should be having is how do we open up revenue streams for county governments? This bill does not open that stream. This bill makes a very big river, a revenue stream, a small stream to county governments through just the issuance of permits for premises. The Speaker, this is a matter, this bill, because the bulk of this
will be happening businesses, not just permits for the money, their own source revenue, and rely less on the exchequer releases from the national government. Mr. Speaker, when we get to that reading, as I said, we will be proposing amendments to right that wrong. And the Speaker, while at it, and I remember that I have made a proposal, a legislative proposal, on the separation of the National Treasury from the Ministry of Finance. The Speaker, some of these things will be addressed if we are able to actualize our thinking on how we separate those operations between the National Treasury and the Ministry of Finance. And Mr. Speaker, without urging members and colleagues to go slow on a bill like this, Mr. Speaker, as a leader in this House, at times I wonder, why is it that when we receive legislation, when we receive bills from the National Assembly, we're in so much hurry to process and pass the bills, and yet when we send bills to the National Assembly for concurrence, they take forever to process, if they ever do. Mr. Speaker, I think our time is coming, and perhaps now is, when we should pay back in the same currency. The Speaker, Part 3 of the bill speaks to the regulatory authority, the Gambling Regulatory Authority. And Mr. Speaker, I have my own issues with that section because of basically two things. One, you know, Mr. Speaker, what we do normally is that when we legislate, when we create authorities, and I think this is a problem that we have inherited from perhaps a level of laziness, I don't know on whose part, that every time that we create an authority or a board, we are very quick to do a copy and paste exercise in determining who the members of the board are. And traditionally, we always put in there a permanent secretary, the ministry responsible, a permanent secretary for finance, the attorney general. Mr. Speaker, I think we must expand our thinking beyond that traditional way of doing things. Because you will find that on every single day, one PS in one ministry is supposed to be a member of a board in 10, 20 boards. They never get to attend the boards. Of course, they have representatives who are designated. But the real impact and contribution of those PSs in those boards is never felt. Mr. Speaker, why can't we move away from that tradition? Why can't we get people who are competent to sit in boards and add value to those boards? Mr. Speaker, it's the same thing that I have seen with the authorities that we create, the boards that we create. And it is repeated here, that the headquarters of the authority will be in Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, what is the magic in placing the headquarters of this authority in Nairobi? Mr. Speaker, we must rise up, we must wake up and realize that used to happen when Nairobi was the only city in this country. Today, we have Kisumu City, we have Mombasa City, we have Nakuru City. Mr. Speaker, the designation of a town
into a city is not just for purposes of name. It's also for purposes of certain activities happening in those cities. Why should we concentrate all the boards, all the authorities in Nairobi and none in other cities like Mombasa, Nakuru, Kisumu? What is the magic, Mr. Speaker, of having this board in Nairobi? And I'll be challenging those senators who have fought very hard to have their towns elevated to city status, to also push an agenda to have some of these authorities to go and sit in those cities. Because there's nothing wrong with that, and there's no magic in sitting a board in Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, lastly is on the issuance of licenses and permits. I've looked at part 4 of that bill, which deals with the licensing and the issuance of permits. And Mr. Speaker, my question is that as we give authority to the authority to determine who can get a license and who cannot get a license, that we will not be jumping from the frying pan into the fire itself. That this will not now be another avenue for serious corruption in this country on the issuance of licenses and permits. I answer because the Speaker, Clause 29 of that bill talks about, have an account registered in the name of the limited company. The Speaker, in this day and age,